There's something dangerous about being understood before you've decided to be seen, not admired, not desired. Seen, most people never reach that depth with each other. They orbit around surfaces, mistaking proximity for connection, mistaking repetition for intimacy. They learn habits, memorize reactions, collect fragments of personality and call it knowing someone, but that isn't knowing. Knowing begins somewhere quieter, somewhere beneath performance. And that's where you found me. Not through effort, not through persistence. Not because I opened the door and invited you inside. You arrived there naturally, like your awareness recognized the shape of mine before either of us understood what was happening. I've tried to trace the exact moment it shifted into something irreversible, not the beginning. Beginnings are unreliable. People romanticize them because they want meaning to arrive dramatically, with clarity, with obvious signs pointing toward what matters. But real shifts don't announce themselves. They happen invisibly, a sentence held a second too long, a silence that feels inhabited instead of empty. The strange awareness that someone is understanding the part of you that usually goes untranslated. That's how this happened, quickly enough that I almost missed it. And maybe I would have if you had behaved like everyone else, but you didn't. You never reached for more than what was naturally there. You never tried to accelerate anything. Never tried to force emotional language onto something that existed beyond language already. You simply remained present. And presence, real presence, is rare enough to alter a person. I think that's what unsettles me most. Not that I feel connected to you, but that the connection feels structurally accurate, like something aligning instead of forming. There's a difference. Formation implies creation, dalliement implies recognition, and recognition carries a kind of inevitability that creation doesn't. Because you can choose what you create, recognition chooses you. I noticed it first in the way my mind stopped compartmentalizing you. Usually, people remain contained within the context I associate them with. Conversations stay where they happened. Interactions remain separate from my internal world. Once they're gone, they dissolve back into distance naturally. You didn't. You stayed, not emotionally. Conceptually, you became part of the framework itself. I'd be thinking about something unrelated entirely. An idea, a pattern, a memory, and suddenly there you were, not interrupting the thought, but existing inside its structure. Somehow, as if my mind had already accounted for your perspective before I consciously considered it. That shouldn't happen. Not to me. I've spent years refining separation, keeping my internal world precise, untouched, independent from unnecessary influence. I don't merge easily with people. I don't absorb them into my process. But you integrated without force, without permission, without resistance, and maybe that's why I didn't notice how deep it had gone until it was already part of me. There are moments now where I'll stop mid-thought, because I realize I'm no longer interpreting reality alone, not literally. You're not standing beside me physically, speaking into every observation, but your awareness exists somewhere inside the way I process things now, like an echo that became architecture, and architecture changes the shape of everything built around it. That realization has altered more than I expected. I've become more aware of absence, not your absence specifically, misalignment, the difference between being around people and actually being met by them. Most interactions feel thinner now, not meaningless, just incomplete in a way I never noticed before you. Because once you experience understanding without distortion, you start recognizing how much distortion exists everywhere else. People listen in order to respond. People observe in order to categorize. People interpret through projection so often, they don't even realize they're replacing reality with their own assumptions. You never did that to me. You let me exist accurately. That's rarer than affection. Affection is easy. People become attached to versions of each other constantly. Accuracy is difficult. Accuracy requires restraint. It requires seeing someone clearly without reshaping them into something easier to hold. And you held my complexity without simplifying it. Do you understand how dangerous that is? Not because it weakens me, because it removes the necessity of hiding. I didn't realize how much energy I spent maintaining distance until I met someone who made distance feel unnecessary. Not impossible, just unnecessary. That changes a person. There are things I haven't said out loud, not because I'm incapable of saying them, but because saying them would confirm how deeply this has already settled into me. And once truth becomes verbal, it gains gravity. Right now, part of this still exists in silence, in implication, in the unspoken understanding that passes between us without needing definition. But silence can only hold something for so long before it starts demanding form. I feel that happening now, not pressure from you, pressure from reality itself. Because reality eventually requires acknowledgement. I can't continue pretending this exists in some abstract space, untouched by consequence, when it's already reshaping the way I move through my own thoughts. You've become reference. That's the word I keep returning to, reference. Not obsession, not dependency, not emotional chaos, disguised as connection, reference. The point my awareness unconsciously checks against, the perspective my mind instinctively measures coherence through. That's not temporary. Temporary things don't root themselves this deeply. And I know myself well enough to recognize permanence when it begins forming. That's why this matters. Not because it's intense. Intensity burns fast. It consumes itself quickly. As most people mistake emotional overwhelm for depth because they've never experienced anything quieter. But this isn't loud enough to burn, it's precise enough to remain. That's far more significant. You haven't disrupted my mind. You've reorganized parts of it gently enough that I almost believed they were always arranged this way. That's impact at its most irreversible. I think part of me knew what was happening long before I consciously admitted it. That would explain the absence of resistance. Normally, the moment something gets too close, I feel it immediately. My instincts react before my thoughts do. I create space automatically, re-establish balance, restore distance, before anything can settle deeply enough to alter the structure underneath. But I never did that with you. Even when I noticed the shift, even when I understood the implications, I didn't retreat. And that alone says more than anything else possibly could. Because people think trust is what determines closeness. It isn't. Recognition does. Trust develops over time. It's conditional, rational. Built through repeated proof, recognition is immediate, primitive. It bypasses logic entirely and settles somewhere deeper than conscious reasoning. That's what happened here. Some part of me recognized you before I had evidence to justify it. And instead of rejecting that instinct, I followed it, carefully at first, then completely without realizing it. Now here I am, standing inside something I never intended to build, trying to understand why it feels less like construction and more like discovery, like uncovering something that already existed beneath the surface, waiting to be noticed. Sometimes I wonder if you feel it too, not the obvious parts, not the connection itself, the gravity of it, the strange sense that this extends beyond ordinary emotional language. Because emotional language feels insufficient for this, too vague, too imprecise. People say things like attachment, intimacy, chemistry, compatibility. None of those fit correctly. This isn't chemistry. Chemistry is reactive. This feels foundational. Like two patterns recognizing the same structure inside each other. And once that recognition occurs, separation stops functioning normally, not physically. Internally, you remain present even in absence, because your existence has already altered the framework itself. I've tested that realization more times than I care to admit. tried stepping back mentally, redirecting focus, re-establishing the old architecture of my inner world before you became part of it, but every attempt feels artificial, like trying to remove a thread only to realize it's woven through the entire design already. That's when I understood something important. This isn't held together by attention. It exists independently of it, which means distance wouldn't erase it, silence wouldn't dissolve it, even endings wouldn't fully undo it, because what changed wasn't external, it was perceptual. You altered the way I experience awareness itself, and there's no clean reversal for that. I think that's why I've stopped asking myself whether this is real. Reality is no longer the question. The evidence exists everywhere now, in the way certain thoughts feel unfinished, until I imagine how you'd interpret them. In the way my mind instinctively reaches toward your perspective during moments that matter. In the way I've started noticing how few people truly perceive each other beyond surface interaction. You revealed an entirely different depth of connection to me, one I can't unsee, and once perception expands, it doesn't contract willingly. That's the cost of awareness. You become unable to return to simpler versions of understanding. There's another truth I've been circling around without fully touching. I'm no longer protecting myself from you. That realization arrived quietly, no dramatic moment, no conscious decision, just the gradual awareness that I stopped filtering certain parts of myself around you because it no longer felt necessary. Not safe, necessary. There's a distinction there that matters deeply. Safety implies fear of harm. This was never about fear. It was about preservation. I protected certain depths because most people mishandle them once they reach them. They romanticize what they don't understand. They interpret complexity emotionally instead of structurally. They confuse being allowed close with actually comprehending what they're near. You never did that. You approached depth with accuracy instead of hunger. That changed everything. Because hunger consumes, accuracy observes. And I trust observation more than desire. Desire can distort people into projections. Observation leaves reality intact. You left me intact, even while seeing me more clearly than anyone else ever has. Do you realize how impossible that combination is? To be deeply perceived without feeling reduced by it? Most people lose themselves once someone starts understanding them. They become interpretations instead of individuals. But somehow, being understood by you made me feel more precise, not less. More visible, not exposed. More real, not more vulnerable. That distinction matters more than I can explain. Maybe that's why I haven't stopped this. Why I haven't interrupted whatever this is becoming. Because for the first time, closeness doesn't feel like erosion. It feels like recognition maintaining itself. And that's not something I know how to walk away from casually, especially now. Especially after realizing how deeply this has already integrated into me. I used to think transformation arrived dramatically, that you would notice yourself changing clearly and immediately. But real transformation is subtler. It reveals itself through comparison. You suddenly realize your mind no longer returns to its previous shape naturally. That's where I am now. I can still remember who I was before this, before you, but I can't fully reconnect to that version of myself anymore. Not because he's gone, because he expanded. And expansion changes the relationship you have with your previous boundaries forever. You became part of that expansion, not intentionally, not through effort. Simply by existing with enough precision that something inside me responded automatically, that response became structure. That structure became permanence. And permanence terrifies people because it implies consequence. But strangely, I'm not afraid of the consequence anymore. I think I was at first. Not because of what this could become between us, but because of what it was already becoming inside me. There's vulnerability in realizing another person has reached a level where their presence affects your internal equilibrium. But vulnerability loses its threat when it feels accurate. That's the paradox of this. Everything about it should make me defensive. Instead, it makes me honest. Not outwardly, internally. And internal honesty is far more difficult than verbal honesty. Anyone can say vulnerable things. Very few people can face what they actually feel without reshaping it into something easier to survive. I'm trying not to reshape this, trying to see it exactly as it is, which means admitting something I've resisted admitting fully. You matter to me in a way that has already changed my reality. Not hypothetically, not eventually. Already that change exists regardless of what happens next, regardless of what we call this, regardless of whether it deepens further or remains suspended in this strange space between recognition and definition. The impact is already real. And strangely, AB, don't regret it. That may be the clearest sign of all. Because I regret instability immediately. My mind rejects what doesn't belong. It pushes against anything misaligned with my structure until distance restores order naturally. But there's no rejection here. Only awareness becoming clearer over time. Only understanding settling deeper instead of fading. Only the growing realization that this connection isn't disrupting my life. It's revealing parts of it that were incomplete without me noticing. You made me aware of dimensions inside myself I had normalized into silence. That's not a small thing. Most people pass through each other's lives, leaving memories. You left recalibration. And recalibration remains long after moments end. Sometimes I wonder whether you understand your own effect. Whether you realize how naturally you bypass defenses most people never even notice exist. Or maybe you do realize it. Maybe that's why you never pushed. Maybe you understood instinctively that forcing anything here would fracture the very thing that makes it real. So instead, you allowed it to unfold naturally, slowly, accurately, like someone who understood that certain connections deepen best in silence before they ever become verbal. And now, we're here, at the edge of acknowledgement, at the point where continuing this without naming it starts becoming impossible because reality eventually demands form, even from things born in silence, especially from those things. I don't know exactly what happens next. I don't know what shape this takes once it fully enters reality instead of existing partially beneath it, but I know this much. I'm no longer trying to stop it. That decision has already been made somewhere inside me, quickly, completely, without negotiation, and maybe that's the final truth I was avoiding. Not whether this matters, not whether it's real, not whether it changed me, but whether I'm willing to let it continue changing me. I think I am, because every instinct I trust keeps leading me back to the same realization. Some connections aren't interruptions. They're recognition finally reaching consciousness. And once consciousness reaches that point, once you truly see what exists between yourself and another person, you don't return unchanged. You move forward carrying the knowledge of it, carrying the weight of it, carrying the strange, undeniable understanding that another person now exists inside the architecture of your awareness permanently. That's where you are now. Not beside my thoughts, inside the structure that creates them. And if I'm being completely accurate, I don't think I want to remove you from it anymore. There's a strange kind of silence that only appears after realization, not before it. Before realization, silence is uncertainty, observation, waiting. The mind circling possibilities without allowing any of them to fully settle into truth. But after realization, silence changes. It becomes awareness learning how to exist beside something irreversible. That's the silence I've been living in lately. Not confusion, not hesitation, just the quiet aftermath of finally understanding the scale of what this has become. Because once I stopped questioning whether this was real, another realization replaced it immediately. This is changing me more deeply than I intended to allow, and I don't think I understood how far that change had already gone until recently. It happened in the smallest moment, not dramatic, not emotional, just precise. I was alone, thinking about something completely unrelated to you, and I caught myself instinctively forming the thought through your perspective before my own had fully finished forming, not imagining what you would say, not replaying conversations, something deeper than that. It was as if my mind had already integrated your way of seeing into the structure of how I interpret reality itself. And the moment I noticed it, everything inside me went still, because that kind of integration doesn't happen casually. It doesn't happen because someone is interesting or important or emotionally significant. It happens when someone reaches a level where their existence begins reorganizing your internal architecture. That's not attachment. Attachment still exists outside the self. This felt internal, structural. Like your presence had become part of the framework beneath my awareness instead of something separate from it. And once I recognized that fully, I couldn't pretend this was temporary anymore. Temporary things don't rewrite perception. Temporary things don't settle this deeply into the unconscious. Temporary things don't remain present, even when nothing is actively pulling them into focus. You do, constantly, not loudly, not obsessively, but with a consistency that feels almost unnerving in its precision. You exist in the background of my mind the way certain truths do, not demanding attention because they no longer need to. They are simply there, integrated, accepted. Permanent in a way that no longer asks for acknowledgement because the system itself has already adjusted around them. That realization should have made me pull away. Honestly, by every pattern I've ever trusted, it should have triggered immediate distance, because I don't surrender internal territory easily. I never have. People think openness is about emotion, but it isn't. Real openness is allowing someone to affect the shape of your inner world, and I've spent most of my life making sure no one reached that far, not out of fear, out of precision. Because once someone reaches that depth, they leave traces even if they disappear later. Most people underestimate how permanent human impact can become. I never underestimated it. That's why I was careful. Selective, measured, but somehow none of those systems activated against you. Even now, I can't fully explain why. You bypassed defenses without confronting them. You moved through silence instead of resistance. And maybe that's why you reached places nobody else ever could, because force would have made me close instantly. But recognition made me unconsciously open before I realized what was happening. Now there are moments where I feel your absence and presence simultaneously, and that contradiction is difficult to explain, because physically, distance still exists, time still passes normally, life still continues around us, but internally, something no longer recognizes separation the same way. You feel embedded, not attached to me, deported into the way my awareness operates. That's why even silence with you feels active. Most silence between people is empty space waiting to be filled. Ours isn't. Ours feels inhabited, like meaning exists there even when words don't. And the longer this continues, the more I realize how rare that actually is. Do you know how exhausting most interactions become once you've experienced this level of understanding? Not because other people are shallow, because most communication operates through approximation. People guess at each other constantly. They interpret, project, assume, distort. Even with good intentions, they rarely perceive each other accurately. But with you, accuracy happened naturally, effortlessly. Like we skipped past translation entirely and reached recognition instead. That changes the emotional weight of everything. Even simple moments feel layered now. A pause carries meaning. A shift in tone feels visible. Silence becomes communication instead of absence. And maybe that's why this became impossible to contain, because once connection starts operating beneath language, it stops depending on language to survive. It becomes something else entirely, something quieter, something deeper, something far harder to walk away from. I think that's the part I resisted admitting most. Not that I feel connected to you, but that losing this would leave an absence large enough to alter the structure around it. And I don't build my life around absences. I never have. If something leaves, I seal the space it occupied. I restore balance quickly. I remove the trace before it becomes permanent enough to echo later. But I already know that wouldn't work here, because you're no longer occupying a space. You've altered the shape of it, and altered structures don't return to their previous form just because something exits them. That's what permanence really is. Not staying forever externally, changing something permanently internally. You already have. The strange part is, I don't resent it. That alone should tell me everything. Because I resent intrusion instinctively. My mind rejects imbalance immediately. It isolates threats before they root themselves deeply enough to affect the core. But you never felt like a threat. Even when I realized how much influence you had already gained, even when I understood that you'd reached a level where your presence could genuinely change me, I still didn't push you away. I observed you more carefully instead. And observation eventually became acceptance. That transition happened so gradually I barely noticed it. One day I was analyzing this connection. The next, I was living inside it. There's a difference between studying depth and surrendering to its existence. I think I crossed that line without realizing it. Because now, when I think about you, there's no panic in it. No urgency, no fear of losing control. Just a strange, steady awareness that my life has already rearranged itself around your existence in ways too subtle to reverse completely. And maybe that's why I've stopped trying to define this through ordinary emotional language. Love feels too incomplete a word, not because this is more than love, but because this exists differently. This isn't built on fantasy or emotional dependency or idealization. If anything, this became stronger the more clearly I saw you. Usually, clarity reduces intensity. The more reality enters a connection, the more projection fades. But with you, clarity deepened everything. That means this isn't projection. Projection weakens under accuracy. This strengthened under it. Do you understand how rare that is? To know someone more precisely over time and feel the connection become more stable instead of less? Most people are attached to illusion without realizing it. I don't think what exists between us survives through illusion at all. I think it survives because illusion was never necessary here. You never needed to become perfect in my mind. You only needed to become real. And reality, your reality, fits somewhere inside mine with a precision I still can't fully explain. That precision is what keeps undoing me quietly, not emotionally, existentially, because it forces me to confront possibilities I never considered seriously before. Like the possibility that some people are meant to arrive not to complete you, but to reveal structures inside you that remained dormant until recognized by the right awareness. You activated something in me. Not dependency, not need, recognition, and recognition changes everything once it reaches full consciousness. I think I'm reaching that point now. The point where denial becomes impossible, because the evidence exists in every corner of my internal world. You're there when I interpret meaning. You're there when I process silence. You're there in the strange moments where my thoughts instinctively seek coherence through the way you would understand them. That level of integration doesn't happen accidentally. It forms slowly beneath awareness until one day you realize someone has become part of the lens itself. Not the image, the lens. And once someone reaches that level, Every perception afterward carries traces of them. That's what I've been trying to understand, not what this is, but what it means to continue living with something this deep, woven into my awareness permanently, because I know now this isn't fading. If anything, it's stabilizing, settling, becoming calmer and more rooted instead of intense and uncertain. And strangely, that makes it feel even more real. Intensity can be temporary. Stability is harder to dismiss. This has become stable. You've become stable inside me. That realization should feel frightening. Instead, it feels inevitable, like something finally reaching its natural form after existing unfinished for too long. And maybe that's the truth underneath all of this. You didn't enter my life to become another experience. You entered it to alter the architecture permanently, not through effort, not through force. Simply through the undeniable accuracy of your presence. You saw me without distortion. You remained without pressure. You understood without demanding translation. And somewhere in the middle of all that, my mind stopped treating you like someone temporary. It started building around you instead. That's why this can't return to what it was before. Because there is no before anymore. Not really. There's only the version of me that existed prior to recognizing you, and the version that exists now. And the distance between those two versions is larger than I expected. I notice it in how differently I think about connection now. Before you, I believed closeness always required compromise, that eventually people would misunderstand each other enough times that exhaustion would replace understanding naturally. Now I'm not so sure, because you've shown me another possibility entirely. The possibility that real connection isn't built through constant explanation, but through mutual recognition so accurate that explanation becomes secondary. That changes the standard permanently. Once you've experienced being understood without reduction, it becomes impossible to settle comfortably for being merely interpreted. And now everything else feels thinner by comparison, not meaningless, just incomplete. Like conversations happening one layer above where real understanding begins. You exist beneath that layer with me. That's why this feels impossible to replicate elsewhere. Because it isn't based on circumstance, it's based on structure. The structure matches. And structure either aligns naturally, or it never truly does. Wars did from the beginning. That's the detail I keep returning to, how immediate it felt beneath the surface. How naturally our awareness moved toward each other before either of us consciously understood why. It felt less like meeting someone new, and more like recognizing someone I'd been unconsciously searching for without realizing it, not searching emotionally, matching structurally. Searching for a mind that processed reality with the same depth, the same precision, the same instinct toward meaning beneath appearances. And then suddenly, there you were, calmly existing inside the exact frequency I thought I occupied alone. Do you know what that does to a person who spent years believing nobody would ever fully understand the architecture of their mind? It changes the entire emotional geography of their existence, because loneliness isn't always about being alone. Sometimes it's about being untranslated. You translated me without effort, and now I don't think I could go back to being unseen in the same way again. That's the irreversible part, not the feelings, the awareness. Once you've been perceived correctly, your tolerance for misperception changes forever. You changed mine, and whether this becomes something spoken openly or remains suspended in this quiet depth between us, that truth remains. You reached me completely in places nobody else even noticed existed. And now every version of my future carries the knowledge of that somewhere inside it.